Hello, folks. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Marcia Butler. I'm the webinar director here at Advice Chaser. Before we introduce our guest and get started, I do need to do a little bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars, such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. We're thrilled to bring you today's educational presentation. Attendees are muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the chat box, and the presenters will answer those queries during or after the webinar today as appropriate. If you ask a question in the chat box, go ahead and leave your contact information as well. And if we can't get to your question during today's event, we'll make sure someone reaches out to you afterwards. We want this experience to be as educational as possible, so please don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. I'd like to introduce you to our presenter today. Eric Maldonado is the owner and founder of Aquila Wealth Advisors, LLC, in San Luis Obispo, California, established in 2017. Eric has over a decade of experience providing financial planning and investment advice. He is a fiduciary financial advisor and a fee-only financial advisor. That means Eric and his team work under a fiduciary standard of care, putting their clients' interests first. And their compensation method is the most transparent and objective method available. Eric earned his MBA master's degree in financial planning from Indiana Wesleyan University and his bachelor's degree in business administration finance from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. In addition, Eric has designations of certified financial planner practitioner, certified exit planning advisor, and certified kingdom advisor. And Eric, I'm going to turn the time over to you. And we're excited to hear what you have to say today.
Thanks, Marcia. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this topic, faith-based principles for managing your money. And those of you that are here live or on the recording later, welcome. Thanks for letting me present and speak to some of these items. And as Marcia mentioned, any questions, please feel free to answer or to ask, and we'll address them or speak to them and try to answer them as best as possible. Maybe that it'll be a good conversation topic as well. So we can go ahead and move on to the next slide there, Marcia, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that this is a little bit different. Usually we're talking to a general audience, but I thought maybe you might want to talk a little bit about your own background so that people know why we picked this particular topic for you to present.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. So, faith-based financial planning is near and dear to me as a faith person myself, follower of Jesus, Christian, whatever you want to say in those scenarios. But that's something that I like to incorporate in planning, especially if the client has that background as well, or wants to meld their finance and their faith. And if that's important to them, then I have that background to kind of relate to and speak to. Of course, most important as a financial planner is the competence of good financial planning, but it's also nice when values align and I can encourage or kind of speak to some of the things that they find important as it relates to their own faith and incorporating those values and those principles into the plan. And the certified kingdom advisor designation that I've done is also has been a really great resource for me to provide some frameworks and some concepts that help put it all together. So here on this first slide here, faith, values, and money, it's really talking about core values. And I guess for anybody, any walk of life, core values are just what's important to you. So trying to incorporate that into your financial plan is probably the step one for a good financial planner to do with a client is understanding, what do you want to make happen? What is most important to you? What sort of good do you want to do in the world? Or, taking care of your family, yourself, helping your church, your faith community. And then from there, how can we align your money with those values? Another word for that is goals. What sort of goals do we want to put on paper? And then that dictates how the investments work and what we do day to day. So that's kind of setting the stage of incorporating your values and kind of getting clear on what those are before we move into goals and action items for the financial plan and investing. We can move on to the next slide there, Marche. And so stewardship, being a good steward, that's kind of like, the big buzzword, if you will, within like Christianity or faith-based planning is just this idea that, we are managers essentially of what's been given to us, is basically what stewardship means. And we want to be prudent with the possessions, the money, the talents, the treasures, the time that we have. And so, looking at money as a tool to do the things that God has called us to do, or called you to do, or your family, is oftentimes a perspective that I see helpful when talking about faith-based financial planning. Budgeting, is just more about being again, prudent and wise with what you've been given. In the short term, there's really only 5 ways to spend money. You can give it away. You can owe it towards debts. You can owe it towards taxes. You can grow it, and then you can save it. So that that's kind of like a really kind of quick synopsis on how to budget. You kind of just allocate towards those 5 areas: live, give, owe, grow, and the O is owe taxes or owe debt. And then reducing and eliminating debt is kind of a biblical principle as well. Although it doesn't say anywhere in the Bible per se, which again, that's kind of my perspective that I'm coming from, biblical perspective. It doesn't really say anything about like debt particular being a sin. It's just more, hey, be cautious and careful when it comes to presuming upon the future, which is what debt is. It's basically taking on money and pulling it from the future because you're expecting to be able to pay it later. But what if things happen and then you're in a position where the debtor becomes a slave to the lender, is the proverb or the scripture that speaks to that, which we don't want to be. And so these are 3 questions that are a good starting point, kind of calibrating your finances and your money towards your faith values. And Master Your Money by Ron Blue would be a good book that I would recommend for anybody to read. And it's kind of like a step-by-step guide. Ron Blue kind of builds out a way to go about financial planning, taking into account these biblical scriptures or principles. So one of the questions is starting with that I would say is unique from a Christian perspective than maybe just starting in another basic way of financial planning, is who owns it? Is this money yours or is it God's? And then how does that then essentially dictate how you go about living your life or managing your money? Because if God owns it, then maybe we have a different set of parameters or responsibilities than if just we own it and it's all for us. How much is enough is another perspective switch, even in dealing with money, because a lot of times we just think about default mode, which is maybe just accumulating, growing more, which is not bad per se. Growing is good, wealth is good, but at what point is it enough? At what point are we content with what we have? And then what else can we do with those funds? Who else can we help? How can we share? How can we give, make an impact? So that question of how much is enough, which is another way to frame kind of like the retirement planning question, which a lot of people I feel like associate financial planning with retirement planning, which is reasonable because that's a big part of the financial plan. But within retirement is this concept of, okay, when is it enough? And then what? Do I just stop working and do nothing, or do I do something else, but not necessarily have to work in the way that I was before because I have enough? And then will it continue to be enough? Again, that's kind of another question about contentment and where does your joy come from? Where is your identity rooted in? Is it in your possessions and your stuff and your things? And will it continue to be enough? Is kind of a way to say, I can trust in the Lord to provide. So Master Your Money is a good a book if you want to read some further information on that. But those are a good three kind of starting point questions that I feel like calibrates the financial plan on like a faith-based avenue. Protecting your family, you can argue that that's faith-based or not. That's just a good thing that I feel like everyone wants to do. But family is important, and an emergency fund, to get a little bit more practical, would be something to start with, which is just having a set of money set aside just in case of what ifs things happen, and then you're able to provide for your family. There's a proverb that talks about look at the ant, how the ant gathers in the summer to provide for the winter, and it's kind of like that same scenario. Create some margin when things are going well. That way, when things happen unexpectedly, you're able to protect and provide for your family. And then moving down a little bit further, insurance coverage and risk coverage. That's again more about just making sure your family's taken care of if something happens to you. If you happen to be the main earner for the family, there are certain ways to protect, whether it's term life or disability coverage, or if your employer provides some of those benefits. Those would be good things to look at and take advantage of, just to make sure that you are covered against kind of the big what ifs, which is a prudent and wise thing to do. And then again, kind of like on the retirement planning concept, which we were talking about before, as it relates to like how much is enough. I think another unique perspective within a biblical framework is just this concept that work is actually a good thing, and we don't necessarily have to try to avoid it, or it's not a necessary evil, but it was a part of the original design in the garden before the fall. God called Adam and Eve to work and keep the garden and to have dominion over it, to be fruitful and multiply. So maintaining that perspective throughout life, I think, is really helpful as you create a financial plan, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to like consider a point in time where you're never going to earn again, or you're never going to work again. It's more maybe setting your life up in terms of how can I make the most impact in each phase of life, especially because we're all living longer. I mean, our president is 80 years old pretty much. So it's like, imagine in your 80s doing your most important, work. So it adds to that perspective on your financial plan, and might even alleviate some pressure as it relates to, having enough. If you're going to work and set yourself up to do work that is impactful, that you enjoy, and also you make some money on, it's a much, easier financial plan, quote unquote, than stopping working at age 60. And that's all the money you're ever going to make. And so you need to have as much money as you need at 60, just to use maybe more of a typical retirement age number. We can move on to the next slide, Marche. And then within investment choices, there are actual like faith-based ETFs or mutual funds, essentially investment companies that are purposefully trying to incorporate some of those faith-based values within the companies that they choose to invest in. So, some Christians or faith-based people might not know that those are even out there, that there are certain, investment managers and financial services providers within the space of investments, exchange traded funds or mutual funds, that they've created kind of like a criteria or a way to include companies that abide by and align with those values, and try to remove companies that don't abide by those faith values, whether it relates to family or other ways in making the world flourish, essentially creating goods and services that benefit people all the way around. So that's something to take into account. Biblically responsible investing, BRI, biblically responsible investing, is kind of a term that has been coined recently on kind of naming that type of investment. You might want to search for that. There's also an organization called Faith-Driven Investor or Faith-Driven Entrepreneur. That is another great resource to look at some of these investments that are purposely trying to provide opportunities for people to invest in that align with scripture or biblical principles.
I know that when we were preparing for this webinar, we talked a little bit about how someone might look at investments and screen out things that they don't want to invest in based on their values. Can you talk a little to that?
Yeah, some of the screens would be like, I don't know, big tobacco. If someone didn't want to support big tobacco, then you can make sure to screen out some of those companies. Certain faith or family values, if you know that certain companies are providing materials that aren't helpful towards children or kids, whether it's pornographic material, you kind of want to screen that out as an example. So you can have your investments make sure that you're essentially not voting with your dollar towards things that don't align with. And a lot of people, they don't really know necessarily what all is in their mutual fund or what all is in their investments. So this is another way to be a little bit more intentional with where your dollar is being invested. If you want to go that route, again, there's no right or wrong. It's not like you're more sinful or less sinful per se because you're investing in a full index fund that has all the companies, or one that is trying to screen in and screen out certain companies. But people that have that desire to be a little bit more intentional with what their money is, or at least kind of understand what are the companies in this mutual fund or investment. This is a way to do it is by having an advisor that can help you understand what they're invested in, and then link you up with the companies that are publicly and overtly trying to align with those values as part of their mission or their mandate.
This isn't something that we put on any of those slides, but it occurs to me we probably need to talk about investment choices that are alternatives. So can you talk a little bit about alternatives in addition to the stock market investing?
Yeah. Stock market, of course, isn't the only one. That's probably the one that's the most, maybe call it passive or creating revenue that you don't necessarily have to take part in earning it. And also it's the one that has the longest maybe track record, tons of companies. The S&P 500 has been around for a long time, for example, large companies. But there's also other ways to invest, whether it's, your own business, that's, for sure a way to invest that probably is more important than the stock market if you have your own investment if you have your own business as it relates to creating your income. Real estate, of course, is another huge, wealth generator in America and the world, is whether it's rental real estate or commercial real estate, where you're creating some cash flow by owning residential, whether it's single family homes or multifamily. And then there's maybe some of the more even alternative to that, which would be private equity is another one that people throw around, which that's another way to incorporate your values there's private equity firms out there that are trying to pick startups or companies that are, whether it's trying to create more clean water or more trees, things like that, where you can direct your money towards private companies in a way that maybe is a little bit more directed in aligning with your values than, say, just big Fortune 500 companies. Gold or precious metals, commodities, oil, that's another alternative that people can invest in. And then these days there's the whole digital asset component, whether it's Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies that are places to invest as well. Yeah, it's a good question, Marseille. Thanks for asking that. Charitable giving, that again also might be another initial thought that comes to mind when people think of faith-based, financial planning. When someone thinks of faith-based financial planning, does that mean that they have to be charitable givers? It doesn't necessarily, but it probably does. There's probably something that is inside of you to say, okay, I want to be giving or be generous and have that a part of my overall financial plan. And you don't need these, complex financial tools like charitable remainder trusts or donor advised funds to give. Of course, you can just give regularly to your church or other nonprofits or people in need, just month to month or day to day. as you feel led, or as the Lord speaks to you. But then there's also an opportunity to maybe include that as part of like a long-term financial plan, and also take advantage of some tax benefits. So for example, people that have maybe like highly appreciated stock, or if they've been granted stock options through their business and they've just held on to them for a while through their company or their employer, instead of selling those shares, getting taxed on the gain, and then giving from whatever's left over, there's ways to give the actual stock so that way you don't have to get taxed on the gain, and you can also give on the market value of the shares. And a donor advised fund is basically your own nonprofit. It's a way to create your own charity, your own charitable foundation, without having to go through the whole process and paperwork of creating a charitable foundation. So you create a donor advised fund. For example, National Christian Foundation is a big donor advised fund. You ring them up and ask them to set up an account for you, and then now you can fund stock or other complex assets, whether it's artwork or real estate or things like that, or you can also put just regular cash, and then you can invest those monies to grow the giving for later, or you can create like a perpetual, kind of more of like a perpetuity gift where you kind of give the gain, or it just allows you to maybe take a big deduction in 1 year, and then you can give that gift over time. That way you're not forced to figure out where you want to give a big gift in 1 year. Just another option in your planning. And then a charitable remainder trust is also, if you have like a big asset or a windfall that you want to give, it allows you to get the tax credit today, and then take an income from it. And then when you die or when you pass, the remainder goes to the charity. So it's a way to create a bit of an income stream while getting a tax deduction and then giving a big gift upon death to whatever church or foundation you believe in.
You added this quote up here that was from Randy Alcorn, I believe. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks for reminding me, Marche. So Randy Alcorn is another author, writer that speaks a lot on kind of faith and finance that I would recommend looking at. Any of his stuff is really good, and we'll mention a couple of his books before we end out here. But this is from one of his books called The Treasure Principle, and it's this idea that you can't take it with you, but you can send it on ahead. And it's from like Matthew 6, where it talks about don't store up treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, but store up treasures in heaven, which are eternal. And where your treasure is, there your heart will be. So it's this idea that you can't take it with you. You maybe heard the phrase, you'll never see a hearse towing a U-Haul, because you can't take it with you. But you can send it on ahead in that you can store up treasures in heaven, based on what you do today, whether it's helping the needy or giving to the poor, towards endeavors that are helping people. So I thought that was a really cool one. Very, very similar to Jim Elliot's, the famous missionary quote, where he said, he is no fool to give what he cannot keep in order to gain what he cannot lose. So, you really can't go wrong by giving. That's not the main thing in terms of like earning your salvation, but as far as someone who's been transformed into a life within Christ, that comes with it, is just this desire to give, because we've been given much. So there's maybe some inspiration or encouraging quotes there for you, or also resources, Randy Alcorn in particular. Thanks for mentioning that, Marche. And then, yeah, final thoughts on some resources that if you were interested in digging further on maybe what Scripture says about certain principles or ideas. Money, Possessions, and Eternity, again by Randy Alcorn, is kind of like the encyclopedia as it relates to finances and faith. It's a pretty fat book that he goes into depth in a way that I haven't really seen in other places on why we believe what we believe, and why it's important to steward things well. And then another newer book that came out, which I thought was really just kind of really to the point and helpful, is Money, Debt, and Finances, Critical Questions and Answers by Jim Neuheiser. And he just kind of takes question by question, things that people ask, like, hey, is having insurance biblical? Should we have insurance, or is saving something that honors God? What does God say about saving in the Bible? So that's another a good resource there for the future.
All right, we have some time for questions now. And so I'll start off with the first one I got here. And I will tell our attendees, go ahead and put your other questions in the chat. We'll try to get to as many as we can today. What about working with couples, and this one that's particular about, mixed faith couples and dealing with that kind of thing when you're talking about financial matters? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, of course, please, by the way, if you have a question, as Marche said, enter it in there, and I loved hearing them. And thank you for, letting me present up until now, and for your attention, those that are here live or on the recording later. Yeah, so that's a good question. A mixed faith scenario, where maybe even someone has a similar faith, but different branches of faith, whether it's, denominations or, certain ways that's expressed. Money's a taboo of enough topic, right, at the dinner table. And then when you add in faith, it brings even more. We're not talking politics or bedroom talk today, but that would even add even more of the taboo topics. Maybe we should just throw them all in.
No,
Yeah.
we're gonna keep it just on this topic.
Yeah, exactly. So, man, it's that I do think that's probably where a financial advisor could be helpful. Not that a financial advisor is necessarily meant to be like a financial therapist or a financial priest, but someone who has had these conversations quite a bit can maybe just, quell some concerns that a couple might have as it relates to disagreements they have. A financial advisor might say, hey, this is normal. This isn't, this is just a flesh wound. You're not going to bleed out. It's going to be okay. We'll continue to work through it. There's no like one right way to do anything, especially as it relates to how we spend money and ways to go about allocating it. So that would be one encouragement. If you are in that scenario as a couple where it's like, okay, we're not getting anywhere. Anytime we talk about money, it always ends in an argument, which, hey, that might happen whether or not you're mixed faith or not. That's a good goal in itself as a couple, is to end each conversation, in a way where you guys like each other more than it started. But the overall, encouragement would be, if you are in a scenario where it's just kind of like beating your head against a wall anytime you talk about money and as it relates to that and how you want to incorporate it with your faith, it'd be good to bring in, an advisor that at least subscribes to a similar faith or is willing to have those kind of conversations in that space. Another thing would be just to kind of like maybe pick your battles and just say what's one thing that's really important, as opposed to like, 5 or 6 things that you feel are important. And, maybe there's just opportunities to keep something separate, where you just say, okay, look, this money I'm going to keep separate for me. This money you're going to keep separate for you, almost like an allowance per month. You guys can each have your kind of guilt-free spending, if you will, on each side, kind of no questions asked, do with it what you want. And then of course you can have your combined finances. That would be maybe another more practical idea. Great question though.
Yeah, this is another question that might go into that discussion here. So the question is, how do you decide on what priorities you have so here's an example. So if you want to send your kids to college and have a college fund, but you also want to tithe to your church, but there's not enough money at this point to do both at once. And so, how do you prioritize what good thing gets done first?
Yes, that's easy. Just make more money. That's, kind of tongue in cheek, of course. And that's the thing. There's always going to be more things to do with money than there is money, no matter how much money you have. I mean, even the wealthiest people in the world, we've probably seen it time and time again. The pro athlete who makes tens of millions of dollars ends up having none afterwards, because there's always going to be more things to do with money than there is money. Now, that being said, like, especially when it comes to giving, that might be an example where it's good to have an advisor that aligns with you on your giving, because that's to be encouraged. I feel like is there's a faith principle there, a trust principle when it comes to giving. Because as it relates to contentment, the only way to prove you're content is to give it away. Otherwise, how else are you going to know? Is if you can prove that, okay, I do have enough by giving it away. So it's hard for me to discourage giving as a priority, because like that quote we said, you're storing up treasures in heaven, and maybe you're not going to be gifted in a way that is going to repay you today. But in the long run, that's going to be, the eternal perspective. Now, that being said, we are called to provide for our family and to take care of our family. So, that's the kind of the internal conflict is, providing for today, as well as, doing what you're called to do with your money for eternity. I think that's just a healthy thing to be wrestling with, all the time. No matter how spiritual or holy you are, we live in a material world. So there's always going to be that conflict of wrestling with, poverty versus wealth. Neither one is where your salvation comes from. Just because you're more poor doesn't mean you're more holy necessarily, or more wealthy doesn't mean you're more holy necessarily. It's putting your identity in Christ, and then really relying on the Holy Spirit to speak to you and your spouse in that scenario, and or your financial advisor on where to allocate funds. So it's really a moving target, and it might change year to year, or month to month, quarter to quarter, based on what the Lord is blessing you with as far as provisions, income. Maybe some years you have big bonus and big income, and some years it's a recessionary environment or a depression and you can't give as much. So maybe taking it easy on yourself, first of all, and being like, okay, you don't have to get it right perfectly. And, but with college education in general, I kind of like to use the airplane oxygen mask, where, we're supposed to put our oxygen mask on ourselves first and then on our kids, not the other way around. So, it's guaranteed 10 out of 10 that everyone at some point is going to have to, if we live long enough, we're going to have to provide for ourselves. Whereas college necessarily might not be a part of the equation for your son or daughter. And even if it is, there's ways to go about providing for a college without necessarily you providing for it. So, when it comes to like giving versus college, it's a tough one. Both are important. Maybe you give a little bit to each, but there's ways to, help your son or daughter be successful when it comes to education without necessarily footing the bill for 100% of it.
All right, here's another question about the role budgeting has. And I know that we talked a little bit about it. Can you talk a little bit more about, you had mentioned those 5 ways to use your money. Can you go into a little more depth about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of an easy way to think about it, because it rhymes: live, give, owe, grow. Those are the 4 main buckets. And then the O is there's 2 owing. You can owe it to debt that you've taken on, whether that's auto loans or tax debt or mortgages. And then you can owe it as far as taxes. We're all going to owe taxes at some point or another. I mean, there's ways to not owe taxes, whether it's like real estate depreciation or whatnot. But that's kind of like in the short term, those are really the only 5 ways to spend money. And then it's kind of deciding where you want to put it. And that, to me, is budgeting, is more of like a spending plan where you decide at the front end where it goes, as opposed to looking at your money after the month and see, okay, where did it go? And then do I have any left to save? That's probably the real exercise to try to grow in, is at the beginning of the month say, okay, maybe I want half my money to go towards living, just lifestyle expenses. And this time I really want to try to put like, of every dollar that comes, of every $100 I make, I want to be able to give away $10 towards the giving bucket. And then the debt, maybe you have a lot of debt now, but it's like, I eventually want to have that slice be zero because I want to try to spend it down. And then taxes, maybe, there's ways to do some tax strategies, but tax in a lot of ways, it just kind of is what it is. It is what it is. If you're a business owner, especially, you'll appreciate this because you want to be able to put money away throughout the year, not just expect to be able to pay for the tax bill come April. So if you're a business owner, that's a great exercise to just say, okay, $15 of every 100 that comes in, I'm just going to put into a tax account. And that's where my quarterlies get paid. And then saving is really, that's your margin. That's what allows you to do your long-term goals. So at the front end, if you say, okay, I'm just going to take out $200 of every $1,000 I make and try to put it to the side and see if it works. Maybe at the front end, you just put it in a cash account to see if it actually sticks. If you're not quite ready to commit to like a 401k, for example, because once you put it into 401k, it's kind of locked up. Although that's a great place to save for tax advantages. So budgeting, yeah, it's crucial in that you start to direct and essentially it's really about awareness to me. Do you know where your money's being spent? How many of us have left a grocery store and have no idea what was on the receipt? It's just like, I don't know what I'm spending. I just had to spend it and I spent it. So, you can of course get more granular in budgeting and do the spreadsheets and audit yourself and, write down everything you spend. Or there's other ways where you can do more like budgeting in reverse, which is put the money where it needs to go at the front end of the month, whether it's towards savings or tax accounts. And then whatever's left over is just what you have to spend. I tend to be more towards that avenue because it's putting money in real places as opposed to just kind of tracking where it goes and then hoping that it ends up in the right places. Yeah, great question on the budgeting.
All right. Can you talk a little bit more about tax savings? You talked a little bit about if you own real estate, it can be tax savings. But, can you talk, and this is maybe not necessarily faith-based, but
Sure.
Definitely, I know there is some stuff about taxes in the Bible. You might want to talk about that a little bit. And a lot of financial planning is about saving as much as you can on taxes.
Right. Yeah, very
So-
true. That's kind of like the famous quote from Jesus when he was just like, render to Caesar unto Caesar. So he's just basically saying, hey, give to who needs to be given to. We don't want to be fraudulent or like, skirting the system from a criminal standpoint. But on the flip side, there are benefits, especially as it relates to giving. I mean, the IRS code is written in such a way that there are benefits to charitable giving, especially if you itemize your deductions. A lot of times if someone has like a mortgage, you can add the interest on the mortgage towards itemizing your deductions or medical expenses, and charitable giving falls within that itemized sum of money that allows you to see if you can itemize above the standard deduction. So charitable giving, that's where like the donor advised fund or the charitable remainder comes into place. Because if you can stack all your giving into 1 year, then maybe you're more likely to write off more, as opposed to in any 1 year, you'll never maybe get beyond the standard deduction. But then just tax planning in general, yeah, there's real estate that helps with depreciation. If you have a rental, you can depreciate part of the property, and that gets written off against your rental income. And then tax planning, that's retirement planning. That's kind of one of the main reasons to put money into retirement accounts is the tax benefit. So like a Roth IRA, which allows you to put money in after tax, but then it grows tax free, because when you pull it out in retirement, you don't have to pay tax on any of the gain or the dividends or the yield of the growth. it's all your money. So that's a benefit to putting money into retirement accounts, is the tax planning concept.
All right, well, that's about all the time we have for questions. And Eric, we want to thank you for being here, and hopefully everyone has gotten something out of today's webinar, and we appreciate you for being here. Once again, we will be sending you a link to the replay of this event, and you're welcome to share that replay with friends or family. We want to thank our speaker and the organizations that have worked with us to bring you this webinar today. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners has committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. Find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. Once again, from Advice Chaser, thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you at another webinar soon. Goodbye, everyone.